My next guest on the Self-Leadership Success Summit is a multiple entrepreneur. I've known her for a while and watched her with absolute awe as she starts up, develops companies, and pivots. Her current title is the CEO and founder of Tickle, a platform for empowering anybody to develop their talent and to monetize it. Welcome to the Self-Leadership Success Summit, Krystal Choo.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad you are. Well, I hope you are. I know you tend to sort of hold back from the spotlight a bit. So thank you for allowing me to put the spotlight on you today. All right. So tell us about Tickle. It's a great name.
Yes, Tickle is such a beautiful name, as you've mentioned, because I think it invokes a feeling of excitement, of intrigue, and also of joy. And that's what I hope to bring with this platform. So a little bit about Tickle is it's a double-sided marketplace. On one side of the marketplace, we have hosts. These are people with talents, with skills, with passions, and they want to share these talents, skills, and passions. And they can earn money doing it by creating an experience around it. On the other side of the platform, we've got the guests, and these guests can buy these experiences, meet like-minded people, learn a new skill, or even just socialize based on a common interest or a new common interest, I would say.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to dive into there because you very much are a connected online individual. And we've talked with a number of people on the summit about this. Me being an old baby boomer and, used to sort of meeting people face to face, I really want to explore this with you. But first, your entrepreneurial journey, because as I mentioned in your introduction, I've seen you do a number of things and pivot. Your first app was a travel app or a singles travel app, I think, and you pushed that as far as it could go, and then you pivoted. And in working with entrepreneurs, the psychometric or the mindset of an entrepreneur is often that ability to make those decisions and make those pivots. So I'm really curious, how did you do that?
Well, for me, everything starts with purpose, why I create, what I create, and how I do it as well. So when I first started the travel app for singles called Wonder, I wanted to bring people who were traveling to connect over common interests while they were traveling. Now this boomed at the same time. A lot of dating apps were proliferating. And so we kind of got lumped into that category. So while we did grow in 165 cities, it became a beast that I had not set out to create. And sometimes I find entrepreneurship is not just about, doing something and letting it grow, but also knowing when to kill something when it's not exactly what you wanted to create, or if it's not in the direction within your purpose, mission, and vision, because then you're creating tension within yourself. You're creating spaces of inauthenticity, and that's not what I like. As I said, I start with purpose. So because of that, we pivoted into a multi-universe group chat where I allowed anybody to chat with each other in groups. And so we took out the singles part and we took out the travel part, and we wanted to see what would happen organically when people get together as strangers and are able to communicate. And this is quite reminiscent of 80s, 90s, the IRC, when people were just starting to understand real-time communication on a digital space. So what I wanted was to build more and more humanity into a digital space. I found that when you walk down the street, you're looking in people's eyes, and people are deeply lonely. There's a lot of lack of connection, I think, within the self and with other people. And so what I had wanted to do, what I set out to do, was to try my best to put humanity into digital interaction. My thesis back then was that it's really difficult to get people off their devices. So then how could I bring the best of humanity into the device? And that was what Wonder was. Now, as we studied how these chats were morphing and growing and evolving on Wonder, ethnographically we realized that culturally, at least in Asia, people really wanted to meet new people. It's very difficult. It's not culturally as accepted here to just go up and say, hey, what's up? What are you doing? Who are you? You're going to get, on on a good day, you're going to get some weird looks, and on a bad day, you're going to get police by your side. So how could I then bring that into a space that people could meet new people, right? When people have friends when they're younger, sometimes paths diverge. And so even if I do have old friends, we may not see eye to eye anymore. How am I going to make new friends that think like me, that can bounce ideas with me, that can relate to me? So Tickle's genesis was really from ethnographically understanding that in Asia, people are much more comfortable meeting strangers when there is a very clear purpose, when there are clear roles, whether it's teacher, student, host, guest, or whether it's a networking event. They need to know, in what frame am I meeting someone? So that's what Tickle
so that need for structure and procedure, right?
Mm.
Okay.
I'm not so sure it's exactly structure, but I think there's comfort within the role. Like the ability to sit with the ambiguity in each role is not as high here, so they're not as tolerant.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've had Dr. Fons Trompenaars on the summit talking about culture. So this is really interesting, and we've had a couple of other speakers talking about the humanity and the need for humanity and its cohesion with technology. Yeah. So you're you're absolutely in the, well, you're obviously, your thesis is correct, is the need for that, but as an entrepreneur, you're experimenting with the iterations of that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So do you think you got it right this time?
I think that you never know what can change over short periods of time. So my view on it is not necessarily if I get it right or not. It's more like how many people am I benefiting with this, with technology. I really see technology as a tool of scale. And I see that in the last 10 years, the kinds of people that have used technology for scale have done so with a purpose that has created some societal imbalances that I personally disagree with and cannot sit with. So it's not like I've come out there and I want to be an entrepreneur. Is that I cannot sit with it enough. So I have to make a change. And it's not about changing the world or anything like that. The way I see it is just correcting some of these imbalances that I'm observing that are proliferating in our time.
Can we talk a bit about those imbalances? Because you're really being very clear as a self-leader. You say, okay, this is my intentionality or purpose. This is what I stand for. This is what I want to be involved in. And very powerful statement. I was prepared to kill something that wasn't going in the direction I wanted it to do. Yeah. I remember a situation of doing that for myself. So I absolutely celebrate your courage. And we need people as self-leaders to speak up and say, this isn't right. The way this is going is not right. So what are the imbalances that you're kind of speaking up against, or definitely speaking up against?
So one very obvious one that I think many people can relate to is how we've found certain models that can hook and addict people to something. And these models are not used to push up, say, good feelings or healthy situations within people and between people. These are used to bring up metrics, whether vanity or ratings, something that is measured for business that may not necessarily be cohesive with the good of humanity. One such thing is having a like button, right? So now you are simulating connection with somebody else when what you're doing is giving them a dopamine hit, a sugar hit, a cocaine hit, almost of reward. And because these reward pathways are similar across most people, the majority of people, they cannot help but then be addicted to this model. So when the whole industry and all its forces are working toward money and certain numbers that then justify that amount of money, things like purpose, whether it's good or not for people, these are things that, if ever considered, is right at the bottom of the list of priorities. And we're starting to see, in fact, now all the cracks, right? The privacy problems, bullying, the suicide, deep loneliness, addiction to technology that has then created imbalance is a nice euphemism to use, but created like severe problems in people's lives. And loneliness is a deep epidemic that is causing, real health problems, real economic problems, real problems with the future of work. And technology is only pushing for that, because when you and your phone have a relationship that can be stronger than some relationships with real people, and the phone is giving you signals and I would say chemical hits that are not necessarily the ones that you need as human, what then happens is the self, the identity, the way I behave, what I do and think about, and my value system becomes corroded by this external influence.
Well, I absolutely believe that in this age of technology, self-leadership is very important to know what your authenticity is. As a father of 2 teenage girls and a pre-teenage son, I'm very observant and terrified to some extent on how much their identity is impacted by the very things that you say. So again, kudos for you for being an ethical entrepreneur. However, I have to point out #irony that you're actually involved in the very technology that creates the dopamine hits from engagement. How do you resolve that paradox?
I actually don't see it as a paradox. What you've brought up is like a construct of polarity. You're either using technology or you're not. And if you are, you're a bad person. So this is the exact imbalance I'm trying to correct. You can use technology for good. For example, in the first one, the travel app for singles, I was not rewarding actions that I knew would be, fun. Like, oh, I'm rating this person, they're hot or they're interesting. We thought about those things and we knew those things would create higher usage, but those things are absent from that application. In group chat, for example, I did not gamify. We had gamification, but I did not gamify the same types of things. I was gamifying when someone feels rewarded, when a question is answered, when someone is connecting, when someone is reacting in a positive way. Those were things that were rewarding. And for Tickle, it's the same thing. Like I said, just think technology is a tool and you can absolutely use it for good. But as an entrepreneur and, like you said, perhaps an ethical one, I think that my driving purpose is always to connect people. So I do quite explicitly reject some of the metrics that have been thrown to me by industry. As a result, I have also not been able to get along with certain forces like investment, etc., because they're not exactly aligned to that. And I'm okay with that. So it does take a little bit of moral courage to explicitly reject that, and as a result, also potentially be rejected by that community.
Okay. Well, thank you for allowing me to ask that question, and it's beautifully responded to. And I love the idea of rewarding behaviors that move people towards a more functional humanity of connection and self-worth, rather than the superficiality of hot bikini body or six-pack abs or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those, but if that's only a superficial focus. And as we know, what gets measured gets repeated or gets strengthened. It's psychology 101 and it's self-leadership 101 in the sense of self-regulation, rewarding yourself for the behaviors that move you towards your outcomes or purpose. So how do you reward yourself? Because you're having to be different, take the rejection. How do you give yourself points for the right behaviors?
I love that you're asking this, because I've done quite a lot of work on myself in creating safety, in pushing myself and challenging myself. But one area that I've severely neglected for my whole life really is the area of play. A play where there's curiosity, there's joy, there's sensory pleasuring, there's some indulgence. These are things that are quite foreign to me, I admit, and not something that I have perfectly balanced in my life. So knowing this, in fact, quite recently, my mom got cancer last year, and this forced me to confront, she's great now, so it's all good. But it really forced me to confront our mortality, my relationships with people, which I severely neglected, ironically, because I was trying to build a platform to connect people.
So there's my #irony right there. Okay. Fine.
Yes.
It's always there somewhere, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for most entrepreneurs, we work most strongly on the things that we lack in our lives. You know, it's almost that syndrome where you're trying to fix that part, and so now I've realized, okay, there's a lot of play that I'm missing. There's a lot of joy that I'm missing, and I'm rediscovering all these things in myself. So I was very, very lucky to have an old friend meet me for my birthday last year, and she gave me a book, and it was the first fiction book that I had been given in maybe 15 years. And I'm a 200 book a year type of person.
Wow.
And in the last few years, I've only done the business books. And so I realized that I lost this indulgence for literary fiction that had given me so much joy, so much imagination and pleasure. And by reading that book, you know, I told myself this year, my goal isn't about, you know, some metric, some number. It's gonna be that I'm gonna read all the Man Booker books for the last 4 years. Like everything on the short list and some on the long list, I'm going to read all of them in literary fiction. And I finished 3 already from 2018. And I've never felt happier, like not for a few months at least. And so I play music as well. You can see a guitar here.
I thought that's what that was. I was trying to
Yeah. So it's just
into the
these little
plant.
things, you know, going and treating myself to a nice meal and not just eating in front of my computer to, you know, feed the machine, so to speak.
Well, this is fantastic, and it's appreciate your vulnerability and transparency around, you know, recognizing the area that you need to balance, right? You know, because life is a wheel. You know, you could one spoke would be finance, and one spoke would be family, and one spoke would be health, and pretty much everyone's got a flat tire somewhere, right? and I think play is something that we need to add to that. I'm curious, with these self-rewards, reading the novel, going for the nice food, do you associate them? I do the work first, then I reward myself? Or you just say, no, I'm going to tick off a number of these each week?
So I understand the whole reward system very intricately. Of course, you know, my entire business runs on that sort of system. Do I apply the same thing to my life constantly? The answer is no. I like to live according to flow, and I like to re-examine my own value system, my mindsets, my beliefs, and then thus my behaviors. So sometimes I don't do it as a reward for something, because then to myself, it's reinforcing certain actions that I may not necessarily want to take in the future. I don't advise everyone to do this. I think this model works for me simply because naturally I am introverted and thus also introspect a lot. So with deep introspection, you would want to have a lot of self-awareness. And with the self-awareness, you don't necessarily need to positively reinforce or punish, for example. I'm trying to move away from that duality point of view and try to encompass a very holistic plurality sort of view. And so I don't reward myself based on an action I've taken. I reward myself when I need the play, and I don't see it as a reward. I see it as just a point of balance in my life.
Beautiful. You may or may not be aware of the behaviorist Gregory Bateson, and Bateson tells a story in one of his books about observing dolphin trainers. And, you know, the dolphin trainers hold the fish, and then the dolphin pops its nose out, and then they hold it a bit higher, and the dolphin jumps. And eventually we see those amazing, you know, marine park shows of dolphins doing somersaults. And he was watching the reward system, but then he noticed that the trainers every now and again would just throw a fish, and there was no action. And he said, well, you know, hang on, I thought you used the fish for reward system. He said, and they said, yeah, we do. So those are for rewards, but these are for relationship. And it's just realizing that if you make everything task orientated or transactional, then you break down the relationship. So
yeah, I think it's a cold way to approach life and your relationship with yourself. And what I like are holistic ways to thrive instead of just, you know, hitting goals. And I do want to share something with you, Andrew, something I've observed around a lot of the semantics, a lot of the language around this whole industry.
Yeah.
a lot of people talk about productivity, about resilience, things like that. And I actually reject many of these frameworks personally because I find them extremely limiting. It forces you to judge yourself even before you have felt anything. And thus it is anxiety causing. It comes from a place of lack. And the undertone behind all of these messages of how to be more XYZ is that you are not enough. I am not enough. And then these are the messages you're telling yourself subliminally or otherwise. So I actually reject a lot of that. And what I'm trying to do is, if you can form enough self-awareness and then you can act on that identity system that you've created, which can evolve and change over time, then you're kind of growing very holistically without that panic and anxiety that's created by expectations of yourself because of all this literature around you.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I'm really glad to get that captured on the summit. Just as you've had the challenge and pushing back against venture capitalists who want you to reward certain behaviors, I also have struggled in this online universe in which this summit will exist or does exist. Is, you know, my principles of self-leadership is your self-esteem should start at 10 out of 10 because you're already valuable, you're already worthy, and then developing your confidence and your self-efficacy moving forward comes out of an abundance. Unfortunately, the marketing world wants me to say, oh, you're not okay, and if you do this, you will be okay, because that's the leverage and that's the reward point. Mm-hmm. And I've personally had multiple arguments with my marketing team about how we write this and how we say this. And the walking the fine white line for that, I know I haven't done it perfectly a number of times. So it sounds like, you know, that's a struggle you've also had because you have to be commercial and ethical. Do you find you're always on the path, or have you slipped off a couple of times?
I think it's very simple for me to follow what I believe is true and reject anything that is contrary to that. That being said, I wouldn't consider myself extremely rigid around it. I create a sandbox for myself to be flexible so that I can grow and discover something new. Even if I'm very ethical and here's what I'm going to do for good, I think it's also very limiting to think that way if you don't create space for flexibility. So I think personally it's super simple for me to follow my purpose. Does that pragmatically span out into abundance in different areas in my life? No. But it is a choice I made consciously, and I'm okay with some of that. And what I'm trying to do now is trying to see what can I do to give value to people, to teach them that the value I'm giving them is worth them paying for it. And also living that ethical sense. So you get what you attract, right? And so this is something that I believe putting out there as a non-limiting belief and having the right people be attracted to it and to grow that movement in a way.
Your vibe attracts your tribe, as we say, right?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Actually, the second person on the summit that hadn't heard that, I thought everybody had heard that, and somebody else wrote that down while we were chatting.
That's super cute.
Very much so. And just on a personal note, I've actually been telling people when I asked you to be on the summit, and your first response was, would it help me? And I was like, well, you know, I want to help a bunch of people. You just repeated the question, will it help me? And I said, well, yes, it will. And you said, oh yeah, well, I will help you because you've previously helped me. And I had completely forgotten that I had. I don't carry around a register of where I've made these deposits.
We never do. Yeah, we never do. I mean, ideally, we never do.
Well, I was talking to Andy Lapata, who's got a book coming out in September called Just Ask. And we were talking yesterday, and his interview will be on the summit, so I hope you get to see that.
Wonderful.
And his book is very much about how people won't ask for help because they don't want to lose face. So they want to look perfect again. And yet, and this reaching out to you was a case of me saying, just ask. And I think that's a behavior that perhaps, you know, we need to reward. Your app is saying, well, I'm just asking. And I don't lose face for asking because through that asking, I get the connection.
I think it's a dangerous thing for people to have the arrogance around not asking. It doesn't and give you any space for growth when you have that mentality. And I think a lot of this fear can be countered when people are okay with themselves, which is not the case. And that's something that makes me very sad, but also I'm trying to see what I can do to help fix that.
Okay. So, so I'm curious, your journey in terms of becoming okay with yourself, the struggle that many people have you always been okay with yourself, or was that a learning process? And what were the key learnings for that in that case?
I think it depends on the time of day you're asking me this question.
Is that a woman's answer? I'm sorry to be gender specific on that, right?
No. I mean, in terms of the usual insecurities placed upon women culturally, I think I got over that pretty early in life. Just didn't subscribe to it. Also feel I've been genetically blessed, so never really had to deviate from that too much. That being said, my journey of being okay with myself has been very tenuous, and that's putting it in a nice way. I come from a history of, childhood severe clinical depression. I've had, more than 12 years of therapy, different sorts of cognitive behavioral therapy, chemotherapy, things like that. And a lot of this was me being desperate to be happy. And so in my journey, I ask people, I would say, not unlike this summit, but maybe a bit more personal. I ask very uncomfortable questions, even to strangers, people that I meet. And, I've somehow been lucky enough for people to be very open with me. So I've been learning from other people's experiences as well as my own. And these things synthesize in my mind. And sometimes it creates tension within myself, like perhaps I'm not pushing myself enough, or I'm not enough. And I have these statements in my head, just like anyone else. And also sometimes it reminds me I am more than enough, and then it also makes me ask myself, is my identity and how I feel about myself regulated based on the validations of other people? And so this constant journey of growth has given me a deep sense of tension, I guess, within myself, being not happy with who I am. But at the same time, I think I have a very large well of tolerance to go down the rabbit hole, to feel all of that inadequacy, and to come out of that just fine, having fixed whatever needs to be fixed. And also, of course, the motivation and effort put into working on myself. And this has been a work in progress for 2 decades, but I think now I've fully understood and bought into a framework that has made me happy day to day. Of course, little things piss me off, bad traffic. I understand a lot of the things around business as well, but I also understand how I conduct myself and how I can be proud of that. And that being an authentic way of living is enough for me.
Awesome. Wow. So I think that's a challenge to a lot of us out there. And, it's interesting that you have this vulnerability and awareness in the tough environment, the context of entrepreneurship. I mean, you picked a very challenging environment for doing that. I
have that habit of putting myself right in the ring of fire. I need to think about that.
I'm not coaching you here. I'm just observing, right? You picked that. I just want to go back to something you said earlier, which I thought was really lovely, and that you create a sandbox for you to play in, to be agile, to be flexible. I was speaking to a good friend of mine on the summit, Michel Duval, who has surveyed entrepreneurs and looked at their psychometrics, their personality. And, the key element of all entrepreneurs is this flexibility, this agility, that the key indicator is the distance between idea and execution. Most people will think about something and think about it, and by the time they execute it, the opportunity is gone. Entrepreneurs move quick. So you give yourself space to be flexible, to be agile. Talk to me a little bit more about how you do that.
I found that a lot of my the goals that I've hit have been from being very rigid and very focused, which is amazing. But I also think that some of the most crushing defeats, whether personal or in business, have been because of this rigidity. And so what I had to do is I had to find a model, a mental model that allowed me to stay true to my values, which is where I can be rigid in, but then be also flexible in how I reach those goals, or, you know, the people I talk to, the types of platforms I have. For example, I'm very rigid about only using my skills to create good for the world. And I don't mean in a bleeding heart charity kind of good. I mean, it has to be valuable and somebody comes out a better person out from using my product or talking to me or something like that. But how this happens, I'm flexible. That's why I'm able to close companies, pivot, change products, because I'm okay with that. And to be able to come up with that flexibility was actually to confront the fact that the thing that was giving me some success, or at least success in some areas, was also giving me deep unhappiness and a lot of dissociation within myself in other areas.
Wow. Again, huge insight there. You know, as a coach, we recognize that sometimes a strength overplayed becomes your problem. Right? And learning to moderate that. Very powerful.
I believe life is all about in that nuance, right? Any of the polar sides is going to give you severe imbalance that you will have to face sooner or later. And thriving to me is not about being able to max out all the dimensions. It's about being centered constantly. And center is not about half this, half that, which I think is a very zero-sum way of looking at it. It's about both. And it's about encompassing all of it. But then maybe across time, there are different compositions, different ratios.
Very good. Very good. Now, you mentioned the word thrive. Before we started recording this, you said you have a side project on thriving. And yes. that sounds like your passion project for the moment. Tell us about that.
Well, I'm not prepared to share the whole framework, but I will say that I'm working on a framework of radical thriving. And a lot of the frameworks currently are something that I deeply reject. So a simple one could be, I'm not so good with labels, so forgive me for that. But so let's say you have a person and then you've created different pillars like health, family, work, purpose, religion, things like that. And then what these frameworks do is, yes, it helps symptomatically for you to pinpoint something that you might want to improve on. But then what people don't realize is it immediately creates judgment. Like for this framework to work for you, you must judge yourself on these different pillars. And sometimes these judgments become comparative, right, to society, to who's around me, my peers. So if this person's going to run a marathon, then on health, can I really put I'm a 10 over 10? You know, I can't run a marathon. So now, okay, I'm a 5 over 10. And all of these things come from a place of lack. So no matter what I look at, while I can see it's helpful in a very narrow band, a lot of people don't have the awareness to realize it's just for that thing. So then they apply this framework religiously to the rest of their lives, ironically causing deep imbalance because it may be a framework that works for a certain type of personality, but not theirs, and they haven't acknowledged their personality and fit the framework for that. So I've always had this deep sense of this is not doing anybody favors, these frameworks out there. They're too limiting and they're not abundant. They don't take into account the very differing personal beliefs and value systems of people and how they operate. And so here are all these people walking around thinking I'm not a good enough father, you know, I should be healthier, my gosh, like I still have a muffin top that I need to get rid of. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's so sad. It's so sad. So this radical thriving, to me, it's about that no anxiety, no judgment framework of awareness that gives people a constant and very personal life of flow, of joy, and of growth. And I think these three things need to balance. The challenge, right? How much I'm challenging myself, how I can fulfill my purpose. On one side of it's a triangle. So then the other side of the triangle is safety. Have I created safety? These are relationships with myself and with other people, my sense of belonging, right? And understanding. And then on the other side is play. Things that give me joy, creation, curiosity, nothing to do with a goal. And the thing is, when frameworks lock people in, like with health, with family, it's still limiting because family for someone, my relationship with my parents or with my kids, for someone could be safety. That would make you think, yeah, it's logical, it's safety. But no, for some people, that's challenge. You know, that is challenge. I have to work on that. It's so difficult, for example, and I don't want to. so I leave that. For some people, it's play. This just gives me joy. It's not about safety. It's just joyful. It's curious. It's creative. I love that. For health and fitness, for example, again, safety. If I'm feeling good and healthy, I feel safe. I can do things. I feel great. But then for some people, that could be Iron Man. That's a challenge. And for some people, this gives me joy. It's play. So this framework allows people to arrange their own triangle. The only thing they need to realize is that this triangle has to be equilateral.
Right.
Safety, challenge, and play must balance each other out. Any imbalances and a gust of wind causes it to topple. And so it just gives them a way to have perspective, to look at it and to be able to say, okay, I'm missing a little bit of joy and play. I'm just going to do some of that. Once I feel good about that, I can go back to challenge, for example.
So it's a flexible framework of self-awareness on how we need to adjust ourselves.
On one hand, yes, but also, like I said, the behaviors that we drive, and with your self-leadership framework, some of the regulation and reward definitely will help to reinforce some of these things, especially since many of these things will not come naturally to everybody.
Yeah, well, you'll enjoy an interview I had with Damien Ryder, who is an extreme athlete, but he became that because he discovered where his safety was in the water, and challenged himself to paddle from Coolangatta down to Sydney, which is 800 kilometers, took him 17 days. But he did it for himself. He didn't do it for the ribbons. He didn't do it. There was no competition. There was nothing. And he talks about sometimes people set the marathon goal for the wrong reasons. They want to do the time. They want the accolade. And he tells people, just go challenge yourself to run a distance on the beach for yourself. Don't tell anybody else, because it's your own personal growth. If you need to do this, you need to do it for you, not to set yourself up into some judgment situation.
Yes. That's why I think that some of these frameworks out there can be very harsh, because the examples they give are what, most people would consider these constructs of what a good family man should look like, a good business person should look like. And when you have a construct, immediately you are limiting yourself. And so what happens? You either assimilate different ideas in your construct if you're open-minded enough, yes, or it creates identity collapse if the construct no longer can sit with the reality out there, or for a lot of people, actually, we're seeing this. If there's a construct and the reality doesn't fit in that construct, they actually attack the reality, invalidate the reality, right, so that their construct can exist within themselves. And so when you see these different behaviors, you're like, wow, there's all of this going on. And it's because of these narrative traps that we've put ourselves in.
It takes a lot of self-awareness to step back from that. The other adage, of course, is that the last thing a fish ever becomes aware of is water, is the context in which we are born into, tends to tell us the rights and wrongs. And you're absolutely right. The human mind, when it experiences this cognitive dissonance between its inner belief system and the outside world, doesn't necessarily update its inner belief system. It invalidates the world. # fake news. Which is,
but also hashtag tribalism, hashtag nationalism, things like that, because they're protecting their constructs and their narratives.
So, well, you're very much a voice for a new humanity and a renaissance of the brighter and lighter things of what is human. And yet, on our political and social media landscape, as you say, it's getting fairly aggressive out there.
It is, yeah.
It is. So how do you intrinsically keep yourself motivated? I know you've answered this, but I'm asking it again for you to restate it. How do you keep yourself motivated to keep going in the face of the rejection and the other stuff?
Have I answered it? I don't remember, but I think it boils down to where I put my time so that I can focus my energies on the right space. I think that motivation is always there for me because I have deep clarity on what I want to achieve.
And that's what you answered.
Is it? Oh, thank God.
I just wanted to no, you said it so beautifully. I wanted to reinforce the point. You have this deep clarity about what you want and moving forwards. And I think that's the inner work that you have clearly done, unless you had a divine bolt from the sky that this is it.
No, I didn't get any bolts.
No, it sounds like this is an iterative process for you to find, this is what I clearly want to do. And that allows you to make the choices at each of these junctures and stay
My
motivated.
purpose definitely guides all the micro decisions I make in the day. And then the sum of all those decisions is the model of who I am, both to myself and to other people.
Thank you. Well, I think this is an insight that people were possibly not expecting from an interview from an entrepreneur. And I think that's lovely, because curiosity, openness to new experience, as we know in the psychometric field, that openness to experience, curiosity are linked with intelligence and with happiness. Rigidity, fundamentalism is going to cause you a great deal of pain. You need to embrace and in that journey decide who you authentically you are. And it has been an absolute honor and pleasure to interview somebody who is both vulnerable and authentic. Thank you very much, Krystal Choo.
Thank you so much, Andrew.